and get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome to day 4 of Wisconsin's Emergency Response Program webinars. Thank you so much for joining and signing up. As a reminder, in addition to the webinars we're offering each during lunch, we also have office hours available. During the office hours, you can sign up for a 20-minute time slot to talk to a generator employee about any specific questions that may not have been addressed during a webinar, or if you have any specific questions to your business. For today's webinar, we have the pleasure of having Amanda Daering with us, who is the CEO of Newance, and she is going to discuss how to deal with layoffs, benefits, and other HR responsibilities. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and allow Amanda to go ahead and kick it off for us.
Okay.
Oh,
Can
and
everyone hear me, see me?
yep, just one quick reminder, we will have a Q&A session at the end. So there is a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to type in any questions during the webinar and we will address them towards the end.
Great.
Take it away.
Thanks so much. Let me see here. Sorry, I'm working on getting my slide to advance. Oops, okay. So, hello. I was going to say good morning, but it's already noon. I'm Amanda Daering. Thank you for the warm welcome and thank you for having me. I know these are interesting and challenging times from a people operations perspective. As far as my experience goes, which may help to frame any questions you may have, I've been in people operations since 2007. That was before we called it that. It was also, as you're probably realizing, right before 2008. So while not necessarily lucky, I have been through some intense times of changes, both in scaling quickly and also in making some tough decisions quickly. Things you should know about me. I'm the CEO of Newance. Our clients really range from seed stage to global. We have a global private equity client. I work a lot in technology, but also have dabbled in a few other industries. A few notes for today. I have tried to not overwhelm with text in these slides. However, anything that I'm discussing where I may be, listing out questions to ask or giving a sample script, I do have a version of this presentation that I'll be sharing with the generator team to get out to everyone that does actually list those by bullet point. So very important expectation to set. This might be a clearer or simpler presentation if I could tell you exactly what to do in your given situation, but there's a reason HR people everywhere are often saying it depends. And that's because there are so many factors like your company size, your company objectives, the type of roles you have, maybe salaried or hourly, that just really change what decisions can be made. So it's my goal today to really help you think through how to make those decisions and provide options. I am also offering free office hours, so I'm happy to talk through any of these in more detail one-on-one, but I just want to set that expectation up front that you'll probably hear me saying it depends more than once in this presentation. I think oftentimes people think of HR as just what's legal or illegal, but there is more to it than that. Of course, we understand that, the legal ramifications are important. The webinars thus far this week, I think, have done a great job talking through some of the expanded FMLA requirements, some things to think about with regard to childcare, sick leave, anything like that, tax implications if you are pursuing SBA loans. So I won't be doing a lot of repeating that information today, but do highly encourage you to check out those resources. On the other end of things, there are times where maybe people overemphasize the people part of their business, possibly to the detriment of the business long term, or possibly to be real, to the detriment to the balance sheet. So what I hope to do today is help you wade through that middle ground. What are those things that are legal, but not easy to decide on? It's really important that we all acknowledge that we've had a few years here where maybe it was a very hot topic to put a mission statement or a value statement together. And this is that moment where those things are really meeting reality. This does not mean that you don't make tough calls, right? This does mean, though, that your team and your clients and the people are going to notice whether what you're saying, whether what you're doing has matched what you're saying. And just as importantly, on those notes, I think it's really important to realize that in this moment, you are teaching your team how to respond to adversity. The expectation certainly isn't, and it can't be, perfection. This is new territory for everyone. But if you are losing your temper at the team, or you are avoiding tough conversations, or if you're being really authentic and really owning what you know or don't know, right? Like, all of those behaviors are going to be patterns that your team is going to repeat. Regardless of sort of what you tell them, what they're going to do is what they see you do. So I think it's important in thinking through these things to remember that you're not only making these decisions for yourself, you're teaching your team how to handle these things. So one of the biggest questions I get is really around like deciding, like, how do I know if I have to lay some people off, or how do I know if I should do a furlough? And so I think the best and most important place to start is with the work that needs to be done. So that's not necessarily a list of what jobs do we need. Instead, it's making sure that you and your senior leadership team have literally a list of like, what are the things that have to happen over a few different time frames. Because while right now is so critical and it's certainly stressful, there is also an after this that you have to take into consideration when making any kind of HR decisions. So a really simple way to do this is to make a list. And it doesn't have to be fancy. The timeframes I suggest are like, what happens tomorrow? What do we see needing to happen in the next 90 days? There is a second half to this year. What are some things that you want to keep on the priority list that maybe are getting pushed? And finally, keeping in mind, like, what is your big vision, right? What prompted you to found something in the first place? Because you want to be making decisions that weigh each of these. Sometimes these are in tension with each other, right? You'd love to keep maybe an amazing data scientist because they're critical to priority F on your list, but that work isn't coming for 6 months. What do you do, right? So you have to think through, is there something we could have them do for the next 6 months? Is it going to be okay with us if we have to start this search again in 6 months? Thinking about what is the work that needs to be done will help you understand exactly how your team is currently allocated. Because next, it's more important than ever that everyone on your team needs to understand who to go to for what. So once you have that list, what you can do is put it in priority order, make it really clear who's accountable for making sure that work gets done. They may or may not personally do the work, but someone in 30 days you need to be able to go back to and say, is this done? And the answer should be yes, right? This is also a really good way to understand who your most critical team members are. And I realize it seems like the kind of thing you might know off the top of your head, but oftentimes if you're not really giving yourself a visual and if you're not thoughtfully creating some strategy around that, you can unintentionally make some bad cuts by not noticing or not having as much visibility into what someone is really up to. What you'll also want to do is note without whatever this work is getting done, right? What's ongoing work? So, what are things that were traditional to your business that are still happening or going to keep happening? And what is pivot work? Sometimes people put all of this stuff to do in one big to do list, and it really, the team lacks clarity then, right? No one knows, what are we still doing? What are we doing next? You can do some of each at the same time, and you probably out of necessity will. But by designating which of these areas of work are things that are standard operating and which of these things are fresh and brand new to the team, you will very quickly understand how to communicate differently based on the needs. So in this example, I put Jane in here as she's maybe the only person who, let's say, priority C was like optimizing your cloud spend. If Jane's really the only person who can do that starting tomorrow, and you have another priority where she could learn it, but she's not ready for it today, if you have 15 or 20 people, this will help you really quickly see who should be doing what and make decisions. So I believe most people are trying to do this to keep the whole team. If you can do it, you are right now highly incentivized by the SBA loans, the payroll forgiveness details, other tax credits around leave, and all those things. The government really, really, really wants you to keep people employed. I'm sure you do too. But the other reasons that if you can keep your whole team, it is helpful to your hiring efforts later on this year or next year. People will be relieved to hear that. You also really need to do things through replacement costs. If it's saving you a month of payroll, but it's going to cost 4 months of payroll to replace that person, that's something you're going to want to think through. The other Finally, the other options are just not fun, but sometimes they are necessary. I will say, if you're in a position to do any hiring, there are really talented people who are starting to hit the market, or they're starting to maybe feel a little unsure in their current situation. If there are any like pretty major strategic hires that you have in mind, this is maybe a good time to get those people to at least start talking to you. If maybe the opposite is true, and your team you have more team than work, there are options. These words get sort of bandied about and people use them in a different way, but I have included some definitions as to how they're typically intended. So a furlough means you are cutting hours, or you're cutting some work for a given period. So you may have seen in the news, JCI is doing a furlough right now, Johnson Controls. They're having people either take two unpaid weeks or switch to a 3-day work week. So probably what's happening on the other side of that is compensation is being adjusted accordingly. It is intended to be temporary. The intention of a furlough is also to try to sort of spread the pain or the impact across the team, rather than eliminating a few positions. Sometimes that doesn't make sense. Sometimes you have maybe the majority of the team are fully engaged, and you have a few people who are not engaged at all, and you can't spread the work out, and you can't spread the expense out, and so then something like a furlough may not be for you. Layoffs. So layoffs we talk about them as though they're permanent, because oftentimes people don't end up getting rehired. But in their technical definition, they're intended to be temporary until such time that people can do what's called a recall. It's kind of an unpleasant word for what is actually a good thing, where people get brought back to work. That might be the right move if you maybe had a few people who were just fully not utilized, but you did think that was going to be temporary. A reduction in force means that you are eliminating some positions entirely. So that means you really don't anticipate them coming back. This might be the case if you're making some sort of pivot that results in maybe a certain area or a certain team or a certain position. You just don't see necessarily the future for that position within the organization. People call this a riff. You've heard that word. There are two ways to do a RIF. One is that you let people go in a RIF. The other is that you don't rehire when someone leaves. So it's like RIF by attrition. Other things I know people are discussing or thinking about, changes to 401k matches. I'll get into a little bit later. Like, this is very plan specific, so you have to really talk to your rep, considering bonus payouts, other ways to think about compensation. So those are some of the options. I do just want to make a big warning, right? Like, please do not end up in the news. I think as long as people are acting with good intentions, and as long as you're, seeking advice in the right places, this is very, very unlikely. But if you do try to use this opportunity to take advantage of people, or if you try to, I heard one story the other day of somebody who asked their entire team to choose their own pay cuts. That's like team Hunger Games. Like, don't do that. I realize this is really difficult. I realize everybody's trying to get creative. If you have a creative idea, I beg of you, discuss it. Please call me. Do a generator office hours wherever you want to have a resource. But it's important to not. It's important to keep perspective during these times. This company has already, I should say, walked back their attempt to cut payroll by exactly their employee stimulus, which was definitely seen by many as stealing from their employees. Each of those options have their own level of risk and their own level of complexity. Again, as I mentioned in the beginning, this is definitely an it depends situation. If in particular, if there's any workers over 40 who are going to be impacted, the bigger of a company you are, the more typically there are things to be thinking about, as far as like, you may have to give a certain amount of notice, or you may have to, you really just want to be able to validate any ideas before you move forward on them. So how to assess your options. So how to go from like, here's that list of options, to what are my options? What could I do? First, you will need to pull together all of your existing paperwork. This is an example where this is a fairly brief slide, but I do have this list, and it'll get sent in detail, broken down. So that includes your employee handbook, every offer letter, especially if you haven't used a template, or if you have maybe varying offer letters, like maybe you're using a certain one in 2016 and you're using a different one in 2018. You really want to make sure you have all of those. Any bonus documents, so maybe any kind of like commission plan, or anything that just involves compensation that you're talking to the team. Just to be safe, I would pull also anything where maybe you, like if you told someone in their review, like, oh, yep, like raise is coming or whatever, just have all that in one place, because what you need then is what you're using that for is a really thorough understanding of like what your employment terms are, any contractual commitments you may have made. Some bonus plans, the way they're worded, it's an obligation. Some bonus plans, the way they're worded, it's more discretionary. Your offer letter should include language about like at-will employment, which means you're free to make changes and they're free to make changes. You want to understand what your existing constraints are, and a lot of those are going to be found in your current paperwork. You are also going to want to talk to your benefits rep. A lot of your options are going to be plan specific. So for instance, if you wanted to maybe furlough members of your team, so there was a portion or more of their work that would be unpaid, but you were hoping to keep them on your health insurance, you need to understand exactly what the bounds within your policy are to do that. So some policies say people can only be actively insured if they are working 30 or more hours a week. I have heard of some plans that are, making exceptions. It's very important that you get whatever your rep tells you in writing. Ideal is to actually get it like put into your policy language, but at minimum, you just do not want to end up in a situation where you thought you were keeping your employee insured. You were paying their premiums, and somehow it was in violation of the policy and they really weren't insured. That's just obviously a very risky situation for everybody involved. You're also going to want to understand if you do let someone go, whether a reduction in force or frankly, even if you, in any other situation, if you had terminated them or whatever, what COBRA options look like. Um, so, for instance, there might be a given window in which they can opt into COBRA. You may also want to support their benefits and maybe supplement their COBRA. You need to understand for your plan just sort of what those options are so that you can make an informed decision. I also recommend that this is a really good time to find out what sort of EAP, which means Employee Assistance Program, might be in your existing health benefits. You may have not used this before, but this is a like kind of a 1-800 number for your employees. It's typically free, and it can either refer them to counseling. It can help them with maybe any struggles they're having. If you do end up going through with a layoff or RIF or something like that, there's typically some sort of resources that you could find, maybe outplacement ish, like things like guides and tips. You may even find that maybe there are discounts to like online fitness memberships or any kind of thing that you could be additionally offering your whole team, or in particular those who were impacted by any change. Those are the questions that you want to ask your benefits rep. Very similarly, you should talk to your 401k or retirement rep. Your plan may have specifics as to whether you could or could not stop matching mid-year. And so you'll just want to understand that. You'll also want to talk through the finances of the situation, of course, with your accountant, your CFO. You need to make sure that you're being conscious of any change that you're going to make from a few different perspectives, from tax implications. If you are pursuing SBA, if you're going to go for payroll protection, what the impact to these changes would be. You'll also want to have them talk you through things like severance, right? That's a certain cash outlay that's important to think about. And the idea of this is really to gather all of your options in order to come up with a plan. This is always true. Just don't make any decisions based on any of the factors listed here. It's important that not only do you not make decisions based on these factors, but that you're quite clear, and ideally you have documentation as to what factors you did make the decision on. You want to be able to defend your decision with some evidence. That work chart that I went through earlier in this, that can also be helpful. If you can show, hey, here's what everyone is doing, and like here's how this worked out, right? Like we had a business strategy for this, is important. It's also, it does matter, if you're just acting with good intentions, that can go a long way on these things, to just avoid any misunderstandings. I saw there were 2 questions. We don't have to wait till the end if maybe they were on something I just talked about. Lauren, or
Yeah, you can go right ahead. A first question is for insurance. Is there a difference on how this works if you were forced to shut down due to COVID-19 versus just a furlough to reduce costs?
that's a good question. I believe you'll want to keep COVID. If it's COVID related, you want to keep it in the language of any kind of notices you're giving. I think most of the things that I've seen have had an extension of, like, even if it's not specifically COVID, it's like the domino effect of COVID has hit our team. Like that tends to still be included, but your benefits rep too could tell you specifically. They may have slightly different language, but I think it's the same. But if it's COVID related, you might get a little more leeway.
Okay. And the second question is, if you have a salary employee, can the furlough be for individual days, or does it has to be for the full week to pay less than the regular salary? So is the days paid just a week divided by 5 days?
It depends a little bit on their role and their salary level. Um, Typically, you're going to try to work in full weeks, but sometimes people are able to sort of shift into more of a part-time salaried role. So, for instance, when I was the head of HR, we added a specific employee classification called regular part-time, where people were able to work basically an 80% job. So they worked 4 days a week. We took whatever if they decided to opt in, it was 4 days. It was everything they normally got from us at 80% PTO, premium pay in, things like that. But a little bit of it depends if, where they're at currently. And you do definitely make sure that whatever, as things are scaling in proportion, that people are still at least making minimum wage, and that you're watching that line of exempt versus non-exempt employees. Sorry, I know that was a little what if, but thank you. So how to decide? So at this point, we've pulled all of our options together. What do we do then? I really recommend you take a look at that. What work needs to happen over all those time frames? And again, it can be high level, it can be messy. It doesn't have to be shared beyond you and your leadership team, but um, see what makes sense from that perspective. Try to match that to the options you came up with from the bounds of your benefits plans and the conversation with your finance professional. I would recommend talking through it with someone, especially if you were maybe a solopreneur, maybe you don't have like a leadership team. Talking through with either a fellow entrepreneur, or feel free to call my office hours, like kind of have someone hear out your thought process, have someone double check that maybe there's not something you're not thinking of. That can help a lot in making sure that you're moving forward on any decision thoughtfully. And then finally, once you maybe have like one or two things that you think like, okay, this is the right move for us, I really do recommend, if you have, I'm sure you do, probably like a an attorney, or if you have an HR advisor or whatever, talking through it with them and just making sure that those options really are viable for you, and they can help you understand, any specific risks. But so a couple FAQs. So this is also a preview of what my notes intensive slides look like. Can I pay people right now just to work for equity? I get this question a lot from our startup clients. Unfortunately, no. Or fortunately for employees, however you want to see it. Fair Labor Standard Act does require that people are compensated for the work that they do. There is an exception if someone is like truly considered an owner in the business, but that's something to think about. Technically, if you already are a nonprofit and it's okay to have people volunteering for you, yes, people could still volunteer for you and perform other duties. I would caution that's it's not going to feel very voluntary if you are a nonprofit employer and you're asking your team to work for free. They're not going to feel like they can tell you no, because they're going to be worried that their job will never come back, and it's going to create an unhealthy dynamic. So I would avoid that if at all possible. Certainly, leader asking employee. Are you legally required to pay severance? No, you are legally required to pay people for the work that they do, and in the arrangement you've had. So if you are changing the arrangement, that all needs to be covered, right, in paperwork from that point on. I do want to say that while there are some great resources, I have them on the next sheet for anybody on your team who is impacted, those resources are really crowded right now. So I do think if you can give people 2 weeks, you give them those 2 weeks. And what that does is it allows them to get sorted on unemployment or other things they're going to have to find. This is also a really good reason to make these strategic decisions now. If you wait until the payroll's, the check's going to bounce, you're not left with anything to help support people. And you don't do anyone any favors by waiting until the well is dry, so to speak. Can I make any of these kinds of changes while someone is sick or on emergency leave? Um, Probably not. Um, Again, highly case specific, but I would avoid that if at all possible. Um, can I ask employees to not talk to each other? Like, if you want to try and keep this confidential because you think that's going to help, like, with morale. Um, Actually, no, that's considered protected speech, and it's important that people be able to talk about their working conditions with each other. There are some supervisor exceptions, but that's very narrowly defined, and it's probably not a pool worth wading in. So what will be available to anyone who is impacted? So there is unemployment, which we've heard about. The state of Wisconsin has eliminated the 1 week waiting period. They've also eased some restrictions. So, if someone has been with you for a shorter time or something like that, there are additional federal resources that have been made available. Some of this has been covered in the previous webinars, but I did want to re-emphasize because I think it's important for you to know and for you to be able to share with any team member who might be impacted. There are also some things within the CARE Act that are reducing, I guess, reducing penalties, or another way of looking at it is improving access to your 401k funds. If someone really needed to make like an early withdrawal. I hope it doesn't come to that, but that would be an option. Another question I get a lot is like, will they job search, right? Like, what will they do? They may or they may not. It being at will employment, you're not really obligated to hire them back, even if you say this is a 3-month layoff. If you get to the end of that 3 months and things haven't changed, you're not required to hire them back. And similarly, they're not required to come back. There are ways to get creative about this. If there is someone that you really want to keep in the long term, something might be like supporting some other type of engagement while they're not working for you, like buying them a Coursera seat or something like that. It's very important that this be optional to them. Like, you can't be not paying someone and having them do like work training. That's not okay. But you could support something else somehow that they're going to be spending their time with. I would also caution to be considerate of the circumstances when it comes to your non-competes. In a normal functioning time, there's reasons we all have them, but if you've laid someone off and then you're getting in the way of them finding their next employment, it's not a good idea. Largely ethically, but potentially could make your non-compete harder to enforce as well. Did I see a question before I move on? Saw the thing flashing.
Yes, there are actually three questions. The
Great.
question: can employees collect unemployment for just 1 day a week, or does it need to be a full week?
They can collect for partial. So they could supplement where they're working half or part of the time with you, and then the other part supplement with unemployment. I'm not sure if specifically 1 day. I'm not sure the proportions, but they could certainly apply. And I believe that it's ready to make them whole at this point. But especially if you were like half and half, definitely.
Great. Has Wisconsin actually passed the repeal of the waiting period? Some people have been told they have to wait a week without pay, as the legislator has not passed it yet, but it was a recommendation by the governor, but it needs to pass since it's in the statute.
Oh, good question. My understanding is that it's active, but I will happily stand corrected if not, and update accordingly. That is also another reason too, helping with uh, severance can become a necessary float for people.
Okay. How and where do you file for the $600 a week as a business owner?
I believe it's through the same mechanism, but I will look that up. I believe it's that the federal agency has basically put money into the state coffers, but I'll confirm that.
Okay. Are there age requirements to receive unemployment?
Uh, I believe you may need to be 18.
Okay. A business is closed for 2 weeks and they are reopening childcare Monday, April 6th. They can only hire half of the staff back now. So, how do you handle that?
They're, are they a child care business?
I'm not sure. I'm assuming so, yes.
Okay. So on the 6th,
Yes, they
they're
are.
reopening, but they're only reopening with half the staff.
Yes.
Okay. Um, what you would do is, first of all, decide if it's going to be half the staff all the time or half and half. Does that make sense? Like flipping where everyone is working half time, or whether half the people are engaged and half the people are not. And then you'd want to notify accordingly. So you'd either need to notify that the job was changing and available work. People really need to sort of like accept those terms from you. Does that make sense? They also have an option to quit at that point. Or you would notify the half of the team that's not working that they are subject to a layoff.
Okay. So there's a pharmacy, and what happens when employees choose not to work due to health complications? They are not ill, but they don't want to be exposed.
Good question. Um, there's sort of a gray area on it. There are people where if they have maybe like a pre-existing condition or something like that, you get sort of into ADA accommodations. Um, in particular, if you have 15 people or more, 15 or more employees, um, I would say this is another, like, it depends, and I probably have 20 more questions that I know for this setting, but I would look into any ADA concerns. I would also look into any other kinds of accommodations you could make. So if it, it's a pharmacy, so I get that probably people can't probably work from home, but other sort of safety precautions and things like that would be where I'd try to find a middle ground with those employees.
Okay. If
Awesome.
someone receives SSI or SSDI, do they qualify for unemployment benefits as prior to this they were not eligible?
Great question. I'm not sure.
Okay. So someone went to apply for unemployment and DWD employee told them they were not eligible as they were a family member of a hair salon shut down an actual employee. Are the laws still the same for this for part-time workers as before?
I don't believe so, but I think there's still a lot of it that they're working out. I think their intention is to provide support to as many people as possible. But from when decisions are made to when they're enacted, there becomes this period where what's called the guidance is put together on like specifically what everything means. And we're sort of in this period of a lot of gray area. I will also say, I know more about the employer side than the applicant side, but I'm not sure.
Okay, great. And then last current question, can employees seek unemployment when on family leave for childcare reasons? Technically, they are considered full-time employees from a benefits perspective, but are only collecting two-thirds of their wages.
I don't believe you can get both. I think that would be considered a double dip, but I'll confirm. But I don't believe so. I think they think the 2/3 um, is the compensation.
Great. That was our last current question.
Great. Um, Something I wanted to talk about, I don't know if anyone on the call has read Ben Horowitz, The Hard Thing About Hard Things. He has a concept called the wartime CEO. And essentially, he he distinguishes between peacetime CEO, we're all about growth and development, and wartime CEO, sort of all about survival. And I've seen founders who take that concept and sort of use it as an excuse to deal with their feelings at their team. um, I think what's great about a wartime CEO mentality right now is being decisive and being clear and being willing to move quickly and pivot quickly. But I wouldn't be doing service as an HR advisor to not know that these are unusual times and people are grieving and they're scared. Might be grieving and you might be scared. And I want to caution that sometimes people take that little bit of startup legend and then they apply it at their team in a way that's counterproductive. So it's important to make sure that you are leaving room for the fact that people are also upset. I also want to talk about other bias to fight when you're making these kinds of decisions. Confirmation bias. So the idea that once you've made the decision, you will definitely convince yourself that it was the right decision. Sometimes that shows up as like irritation at the people you're letting go. It's hard to face the fact that you don't feel good about it. And so then you sort of find them annoying in a way that like justifies it for you. I would watch out for that. It also can make you see signs of hope or see big pieces of dread that aren't really there. And it's important that you just be aware of this especially when you're making people decisions, because they're very hard to undo. Recency. So the idea that the last person you talked to or the last bit of news you heard is just, it feels in your mind bigger than the rest, and that's not reality either. So being really conscious of, if there's team members that by the nature of your work you spend more time with than others, be very thoughtful about whether it's because those are your more critical team members or because you just see them more. Finally, loss aversion. As humans, we hate losing more than we love winning. And this makes us do things like taking too long to decide. It makes us do things like making 1,000 like teeny cuts. Like you don't want to end up in a situation where every single week one person is, getting laid off or something, because you're trying to avoid that loss aversion, right? Like that ends up being much more stressful for the team. Loss aversion, can also make you lose sight of some of the longer term goals and plans that you have. So as you're making any of these really tough decisions, it's just important to be conscious of these and try to, this is why I suggest, making those lists and having these systems, is to try to catch this bias, or at least, put it in front of yourself in a way that you can make a more rational decision. So that's how, the how you decide. So assuming you've decided, I want to run through kind of what to do next. For one, I think it's important that you tell your managers. You can't tell your managers and your team at the same time, because your managers can't process that information and support your team all at once. They need maybe a day or so. The more action someone has to take, the more notice they can have about bad news. If there's no action that they're going to take and they're just sitting on bad news, you should minimize that window as much as possible. That's to minimize the odds that they're going to try to do someone a favor and tell them bad news before you're ready for it to be out. That's also because it's really painful to like know someone's getting let go and be around them for 4 weeks, right? Like that's awkward. So yes, tell your managers, tell them in close succession to when you plan on actually executing any changes, and make sure that you are really talking through with them, like, how are you going to describe this to the team? How are you going to, like, what are the next steps? What are the plans? And give them, ideally at least an overnight to prepare themselves emotionally so that they can be there emotionally for the team. Finally, telling impacted individuals, do not do it in groups. In particular, as I understand it, the audience of this is small businesses. If you tell 5 people upsetting news all at once, you're sort of creating this emotional labor for them to have to like see how other people are reacting, and they can't really have a real reaction, and they feel self-conscious about asking questions. And frankly, I just think this is like, it's just very important that it be either maybe a CEO and a manager and the person impacted, maybe the CEO and the person impacted. Um, it can be a good idea to have, sort of a witness there about what was said, but make sure you have the right people in that conversation, and make sure that conversation is as small as possible and as personal as possible, for the person being affected, right? You're also going to want to prep everything. So have your formal letter of change ready, have the Cobra information, have, the list of anything that you might need to collect from them. Make a checklist. Again, I will send a sample checklist in my after presentation of this, but have all that ready, then have the conversation. Do not have the conversation and then get everything ready while this poor person sits and like waits to get information from you. A couple other tips about having this conversation. It's not about you, so you need to make sure that you're prepared and that you don't either get so emotional that this person feels the need to console you, or that you spend so much time apologizing that they get all Midwestern on you and are like, it's okay, because that's how we're all wired. And that's, just be very conscious of coming to it with empathy and coming to it with the solemn nature of what's happening, but not being so over the top with your own feelings that it becomes about you. You do need to show your face. Ideally, of course, we'd be doing these things in person. Do not do this in person right now. Respect social distancing, but at least use video. As far as having the actual conversation, schedule it relatively soon for when it's going to happen. Like, don't put a calendar invite a week out that says status of your job and then leave someone for 7 days to wonder what's happening. Like, if you can, I would put it on like same day. Minimize that angsty wondering what if. There's no use to it. Once you are together, jump right in. Like, they are already nervous. They already think bad news is coming. Bad news is coming. So tell them what it is. There's a relief to knowing. Explain the business circumstances and explain specifically what's happening to them and their job as a result. So you might say, as you know, Corona and its result on the travel industry has had a substantial impact on our business. Unfortunately, that's brought us to some really tough decisions. That includes the reality that we have to eliminate your position. What that means is that today will be your last day. Then you're going to give a big pause. People are reeling and like processing the information. It happens time and time again that you're nervous, and so you kind of like ramble on at them with all kinds of information, and they can't hear you. So big pause, count, do whatever you have to do in your head. Just sit there for a second. Then get very specific about what they'll be getting from you, and start with anything that's like money or security or like health insurance or anything like that related. Tell them exactly when their last check will be. Tell them exactly how much money will be on it. Tell them exactly what you're going to do regarding benefits, whether it's you're keeping them and they're going unpaid for a while, whether it's that they're going to have to go through Cobra, whatever it is, say it. Assure them that you will be sending all of this in writing. Offer them a chance to ask you questions. They may or may not. Let them know that they can absorb this news and then come back to you with questions. And then be really clear about what you can or can't offer. There's a really emotional impulse in these conversations to like try to assure someone like, oh, I think this is going to turn around any day now and blah, blah, blah. And like, if that's not really true in your business, like, do not say that to people. Like, people need to know what to do for themselves and their families. And you do them a disservice by making false or absurdly optimistic promises. Instead, be realistic, and let them know what you are able or willing to do. You may, if someone is furloughed or they're laid off, You may want to make sure that you set up an existing cadence of communication to stay in touch with them. If you're doing a riff and this is, you're separating, you're ending the employment relationship, you offer, if it's true, if you're willing to give references or if you're willing to give introductions, whatever you feel you can offer. And then make that clear, make it clear that they can ask you questions at a later date, and then let them go. This is for video. I will add, if you ever are in this situation otherwise and in other circumstances, this is when you'd want to make sure that maybe you're having this conversation near an exit, or if you were physically in person, don't make them sit there then, right, at their desk. It's too awkward. Then you'll tell the team. This is also really important that you need to tell the team. Like, someone can't just be gone, because it will make it look like you just didn't want to face the bad news. Email is really for clarity. Email is not for initial delivery with most unfortunate news. You may send a follow-up, or you may assemble maybe some frequently asked questions and have your managers ready with those. But you're going to hear questions like, is this the only change? And you should know what your answer is going to be. You'll hear questions, what's the state of the business? People react in a few different ways. Some people will be really, really emotional, and they'll come from an emotional place about it. What are we doing for the person? How do we make sure they're okay? Other people it'll make them feel better to get very, very granular. So they'll be like, will you show me the books? Will you, I want to understand like exactly what the plan is for the next 100 days or whatever. Be ready for those and just think about your answers as you can ahead of time. You'll also get questions like, what does this mean for me? Like, if I was a marketing team of 4 and now I'm a marketing team of 1, have answers ready for me as to what is staying on my plate, what's going to other people's plates, what's getting put on pause. These are things, maybe you have to sort some of the details out, but you really want to come prepared with those answers. Staying organized, like I said, checklists are your friend in this case. There's some of the formal elements of the checklist, right? Required notice around like COBRA or something like that. There's some of the things that are specific to you, like, do they have access to Salesforce? Do they have access to some of your online systems? Especially if you're going to do like a half and half or like a partial furlough, you need to set some really clear expectations that like people shouldn't still be emailing on Thursday and Friday, right? We live in this world where all these boundaries are blurred, but you don't want to end up in a situation where people are essentially still working full time and you're only paying them part time, because that's not the agreement you came to. Any other things on the checklist can be like equipment or keys. If someone does have your equipment right now, please consider sending them maybe like a prepaid box. Like, someone should not have to pay you to get your own equipment back to you, but please do not go to their house. Partially social distancing, partially you've just given very upsetting news, and showing up at someone's home is high risk, right? We all think these things are never going to happen, or that things aren't going to go awry, but that's exactly what people think before things happen or things go awry. So think through those things with safety in mind and with respect for the impacted individual. All that to be said, you may still be wondering about communicating with your existing team, like what happens after that. Either after a big change, or frankly, this is good advice even if you're not having any headcount change, be very, very, very explicit and more than once with your team about what's staying the same and what's new. If you don't do that, people will take what you're saying is new and they'll drop it on top of everything they're already doing, and they won't take anything off, and all the work will suffer. And then in a month, you'll find out that they were working on something that wasn't a priority anymore. So that's why that sort of like what's new, but saying out loud what's staying the same is really important. Alignment across your leaders has really never been more important, right? People are nervous. They're looking to you for guidance. They're looking to you for clarity. And when people are hearing different things from different leaders, it really just shows them it shows them some cracks in the wall while they're already worrying about an earthquake, right? Some ideas for this you could do, and I've done before, like a 15-minute call every once a week. We did it Fridays, but it was essentially any big updates, our progress on our goals. Nothing makes people feel better than an action plan and seeing progress made against that action plan, and some open Q&A. Like, give some time, give a channel for people to ask you the questions they have. Also consider, I would let your team lead. I would be the one to establish that you're going to do these, but I would pay a lot of attention to what channels your team prefers. I'm a person who I'd rather be like doing the work than like telling my team like, oh, and then this, and then that, and then this. So for me, I'd love to just like shoot it into a Slack room and call it a day. Like, great, I updated them. My team cannot keep up that way. They don't have the filing cabinets of the business in their head like I do. And so it's very, very important that you consider context when you pick that channel and when you pick that cadence. As people are upset, give them information on exactly where they can go with concerns. Who do they ask? Equip your managers on how to like really listen, and help someone either problem solve, or this is a moment in time where someone might not need your problem solving. They might just need your ear. So how to do that, right? Like, make sure there's some room in your culture and in your system somehow that they understand who to go to and how, because that way they're still able to function as a whole, without getting distracted. It's also really important to make room for joy. This isn't fun, and that doesn't mean there can be no good days or no good moments or no memories that your team will come out of this experience with, having bonded with each other. And joy is a big part of that. I think your role as the leader is clarity and expectations. I think your job is to make room for the joy, but I really encourage you to let your team take the lead on this. If me as the CEO or the head of HR, if I schedule like team bingo, people are a little like eye rolling. Yet if one of their peers is like, I think it'd be fun, team bingo, and they schedule it, all of a sudden it's fun, it's different. So look for anyone on your team who's showing signs that they're interested in something like that, and ask them how you can support them, ask them what they need, because your goal should really be authenticity, and authenticity starts at the team level. Thank you all so much for your time today. I know I'm okay to stay on for another couple of minutes, but I know we're time boxed. But if there are questions, happy to answer those.
Yes, we do have one question. A business owner has one full time employee and seven part time employees who work a total average of hours of 116 hours. When applying for aid, can they take advantage of the total average, which is 116 hours, and divide that by 30 hours to configure their full time employees?
I believe that right now the aid is based on your previous payroll totals. I'm not sure, but there is math in looking at the payroll forgiveness on total headcount. I'm trying to think, because the total, yes, because it would be equivalent. What you'd want to make sure to look into, and maybe this was covered in one of the other SBA webinars, but is how that headcount is, if that headcount is by full or partial. Because what you wouldn't want to do is have a substantial decline in headcount, and have that negatively impact your payroll forgiveness.
We don't have any current questions. We have some thank yous and great jobs, Amanda's. I'm not sure if anyone's typing right now. We have some more thank yous.
Oh, thank you. I will be, like I said, sending a lot of the things I said, I have in a very text dense version of this presentation, that I'm happy to send out. I'll also have linked in there my office hours. So if I can help you maybe talk through any of these one-on-one situations, if I don't know the answer, I'm happy to help you figure out where we can go find it.
There is one question. When the dust
Sure.
settles and you're ready to rehire all or some of the team, how do you suggest doing this?
Great question. Um, I think do the same assessment of what's coming up next. What are the circumstances of the business? If and who do you need? In what order? I kind of prioritize the team in that order, and then the if you are bringing back only part of the team, I would reach out personally to the people I wasn't bringing back and explain exactly what was going on right now, explain my intentions if I have them about bringing them back at a later date. Um, you may need to, depending on the situation. So if you check with your benefits person about getting about what's called a qualifying event, basically getting them back on if they haven't been on your benefits. You wouldn't necessarily have to do the full onboarding, but I would probably have like a re-engagement checklist of like, ooh, re-add them to Slack and re-add them to all the things that you might forget. But yeah, I'd prioritize who. I'd be very clear in my communication to everyone, especially if it wasn't the whole group. And then I'd handle some of those tactical things and make sure you're organized around that.
Great. Oh, wait, more. Is it legal or ethical to incentivize laid off employees with a rehiring bonus?
Um, Legal, yes. I would put that in terms of just like discretionary compensation. Um, Ethical, I mean, I don't. To me, I think the person would have that. They wouldn't be contractually bound. You wouldn't be controlling their decision. You'd be incentivizing them. I would be cautious if you planned on doing like some rehire bonuses and not others. Um, that would probably get dicey pretty quickly on your team and might cause you more pain than good. You may have employees when they're looking at being rehired who do want to change the game, so to speak, from whatever your arrangement was before. You'll want to make sure you have that conversation out loud.
Okay. Do you think that a rehire checklist would be helpful?
Very much so. You could, if you have a current hire checklist, I would just maybe copy it and then take out anything that doesn't have to be done from scratch and then add anything else new. I'd also make sure to welcome them back in the team, maybe do something fun to celebrate the fact that they're back, sort of the way you would welcome a new hire. Um, don't just like put them back at their desk and go about your business.
Okay, we have two more questions. If
Sure.
you let employees go, would you recommend at least trying to pay them to work on any projects that might come your way to kind of supplement their income?
Sure. You might want to be conscious of how you do that. I would probably do a new independent contractor contract with them just to make very, very clear that you're changing the scope and the arrangement of work. And then, I'd probably pay them on a 1099 basis. So you'd want to make sure that they understood the impact to their unemployment. Or if it was smaller, you may be able to pay them as a W-2 hourly employee. But I would just be really clear about putting the scope and the exact hours and everything else so that they don't work too much for their unemployment, and B, that it just doesn't get messy with like considering them rehired.
Okay. A few more questions. What if some of the people you don't want to hire back? Main reason they call in sick 35% of the time. The business owner is a daycare and the workers are on unemployment now.
Good question. Um, I You don't have to hire them back. I would be clear with them about that though, so that they knew what I wouldn't want ethically is like someone assumes their job is coming back and it's not coming back. So I would maybe change that. Um, I would either hire the people I knew I wanted back first at minimum, um, and then you could actually when you're letting people know like, hey, these people are coming back first, My criteria in making that decision were things like time and attendance. That's a very valid criteria. And then go from there.
Okay, similar question. If the entire staff was furloughed, could you decline to bring back certain staff members who have been having previous performance issues? Do you think that would create any legal or ethical issues at all?
I don't think you'd have to like rehire them and then let them only to let them go. Like that doesn't make sense. Um, I do think the implication of a furlough is that it's temporary though. So if over time, the situation changes, I would address it as a situation has changed. So if let's say they've been furloughed for a month and you ultimately decide they're not coming back, then I would probably alert them like, hey, as things have evolved and we look at the needs of the team, this is going to be a permanent situation.
Great. Well, I don't see any other questions in the queue currently. People are appreciating your advice. They said, great job, and thank you so much for the information. This was very helpful. It's a round of applause to. Um,
Thank you.
so, thank you all so much for attending today's webinar. As Amanda said, that she is offering office hours, so feel free to sign up for office hours with her or with a generator employee. We have one more webinar tomorrow, which will cover the mental health for small business owners. I've actually participated in already, so I highly recommend it. And thank you all so much. And feel free to reach out if any questions come up. And thank you again, Amanda.
Thank you so much for having me.
Great.
Enjoy the sunshine today, everybody. Bye.
Bye bye.